Welcome back to the lectures. This time we're looking at the scientific method and behavioralism in the social sciences. So what is the scientific method? So in the scientific method, we examine something by systematic collection of data, followed by analysis of the data. So usually we're looking at some kind of quantitative data, but it doesn't have to be that. Sometimes you can do an experiment to see when you mix one chemical with another, what happens, right? So you can observe the phenomena and record what happened. But usually a lot of quantitative data is the goal. We also want others to be able to repeat the same experiment. So if they follow the same steps, so we record our steps. And we want them to arrive at the same conclusion. Because when everybody follows the same steps and arrives at the same conclusion, we can say we have objective facts. So you see there's a level of control in this experiment, right? We have set paths. The relationship between things. Usually in a scientific experiment, we are trying to understand the relationship between things, meaning that if I pour one chemical on another, will it result in the same gas every time? Now look at another experiment, in like the physics, terms of physics, you might want to see how force affects acceleration when mass is kept constant. This is Newton's first law, right? So by changing the force, you want to see if acceleration will change similarly when mass is constant. Now try an example from political science. We might want to see if wars are preceded by the rise of authoritarian regimes, or whether they also occur or are initiated by democratic states, right, or regimes. Let's look at what the scientific process entails. First, you have to give what it is you're observing a name. And you have to categorize all kinds of phenomena. For example, when you are observing war, at what point does violence in society become categorized as war? So you have to sit and do all that mental, conceptual work, but you also have to be in agreement with other people, right? So you cannot just do this in isolation. There has to be some level of sharing with the social science or broader audience. You also have to decide how to measure these quantities. Because you're in the scientific method, you're about measuring and observing and taking pictures and looking at the color changes and measuring some level of output. Maybe it's mass or whatever it is, but you have to measure. And you have to decide how to measure these quantities. So before you can do that, you have to decide what's a good indicator for the quantity. If you look at, for example, if you are to find or measure something to do with fruits, are oranges a good indicator? Yes. But if you are to measure international war, is civil war a good measure? No, because civil war happens within the state, whereas international war is happening between two states or three states or more. So your indicators actually have to work, right? They have to make sense. Once you've decided on an indicator, you can now start using some kind of method to measure quantities. Let's look at case studies. So in this example, we might be considering Germany in 1930s and looking at whether World War II happened because it was preceded by the rise of an authoritarian state in Germany. Okay, so in this case, you are trying to find out if World War happened because of the rise of authoritarian states. Okay, so your case study is Germany. Now you're going to have lots of information if you look at this case study. One way in this scientific approach is to compare similar cases and see if you can find anything in common. For example, you might choose the case of Germany in 1930s, and you might consider the case of Germany, say, pre-World War I. You could also look at a very dissimilar kind of situation, such as the Peloponnesian War, which, Thucydides examines. From these similar and dissimilar cases, you might find certain things in common as far as causal relationships. And you might also find things which are very, very different. Based on your cases, if you are able to make generalizations about the causes of war, then you are basically following the empirical method. How many cases do you have to compare? If you have a few, you can still come to some conclusion. You can make some generalizations about causes of war based on your cases. If you have many, many cases, what do you do with that? Well, if you have like hundreds of cases of war, you might be able to do something statistical. You might have a statistical conclusion. But you don't always have to do statistical studies. You can tabulate your results and, say, okay, here are the way things are. I see a lot of similarity here, and in some cases, there's not much similarities. So this is what the whole scientific approach is about. And behavioralism is a tradition within social sciences that arises in the 19th and 20th, centuries, where the tendency is to say that we can do the same thing in social science as what we have done in the physical and biological sciences. So the goal is to have, observation-based data and to then analyze that data in a scientific method and then to make some generalizations. There's also that assumption that data can reveal certain truths about society, and that such truths are more accurate than those that are not empirically obtained. Again, empiricism is where you are doing observation-based studies. So this is what behavioralism is about. I'm going to stop here. We'll see you in the next lecture.